Many thanks. And that concludes portfolio questions, and we now move to the next item of business, which is a debate on motion number 4886 in the name of Fergus Ewing on business tourism. I would invite members who wish to speak in this debate to press the request to speak buttons as soon as possible. And if you're all sitting comfortably, then we'll begin. And I would call on Fergus Ewing to speak to and move the motion. Mr. Ewing, you have 14 minutes when you are ready, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm delighted to secure this debate on business tourism, and I'm also pleased to see the cross-party recognition of the importance of the motion. And in a spirit of consensus, let me say straight at the outset that we intend to accept the Labour amendment today with 2 points of clarification. Firstly, that Aberdeen City Council have agreed to waive the accumulated to £26.2 million. But we believe a provision may be made for that, but it's not yet paid for. And secondly, that the claim with regard to the number of business tourism delegates that travel to Glasgow should refer to international delegates. But with these 2 points, which I hope we can agree, clarified, we're delighted to support the Labour amendment today. Presiding Officer, business tourism is extremely important to Scotland. The meetings, incentives, conference and events, the MICE market, as it's known, is a hugely important market for Scotland, and it is on track to be a £1,000 million industry each year. I can assure you that the Scottish Government are wholly committed to the success of business tourism. Scotland is, for example, the only country in the UK to have a team visit Scotland's business tourism unit dedicated to the MICE market. The purpose of this debate today is to allow all parties to discuss business tourism as a key part of one of the priority sectors in the Scottish economy and our economic strategy. It also enables us, Presiding Officer, to say a big thank you to all of the stakeholders and all of the partners who are involved in making business tourism such a great success, including Stephen Leckie of the Crieff Hydro, who I think should be somewhere up in the gallery. Hi, Stephen, if I'm allowed to say that, Presiding Officer. And Stephen heads up and has put a power of work into making the Scottish Tourism Alliance a great success, bringing together industry. And I would recommend more businesses to sign up to join the STA, because the more members they have, the stronger their voice is, the more effective their lobbying, I believe, will be on some of the most important issues affecting the industry. Business tourism has moved from being perceived as a niche part of Scotland's overall tourism sector to become one of the main focuses and interests, strongly supported by a wide range of Scotland's agencies and destinations. And there's 2 reasons for this. The first is the direct economic contribution. Meetings and conventions of only 500 delegates can deliver an economic impact of £1 million to over £10 million from a gathering with 5,000 delegates. And the second reason is that business tourism showcases our assets to the world, it boosts our exports, enhances our reputation and helps to attract inward investment. Business tourism, therefore, is a key driver of growth and collaboration for Scotland, not least as a kind of bridge between tourism and inward investment. Business tourism is different because it supports a wide range of small, medium and large companies across Scotland that are not necessarily involved in the leisure market. For example, conference centres, catering companies, unique venues, charitable status venues, civic venues, academic venues, florists, design agencies, audiovisual companies, coach and private hire companies, and I could, of course, go on. In addition, business tourism is less seasonal than leisure tourism, a very significant point, and this brings visitors to country outside the traditional leisure season. Business tourism visitors spend between 1.5 to nearly 2 times more than leisure visitors in local shops, restaurants, bars, taxis and other places. Business tourism visitors have a high propensity to return. An interesting statistic is that 40% of them return to Scotland. So if we can attract 1 or 10 new people to Scotland as business tourists, then it's likely that 4 of them may come back and perhaps bring their families. I think that's another useful benefit of the expansion and success of business tourism. Business tourism, especially the conference and meetings sections, currently make a strong contribution to the economic vitality of Scotland's key tourism destinations, with a particular focus on the cities of Edinburgh, Glasgow, Dundee and Aberdeen, and principal resort destinations such as Gleneagles, St Andrews and Perthshire. But we don't see business tourism as solely for the larger venues or solely for the cities. Our cities have so much to offer in their history, heritage, their unique venues and their luxury hotels. And a great number of luxury hotels, particularly perhaps in this capital city, have had enormous investment spent on them, Presiding Officer, as I've had the pleasure to see over the last year or so. But it's not just about cities, because the whole of Scotland has a wealth of distinctive venues and top-class accommodation. I've had the pleasure of meeting buyers for corporate events and hospitality on several occasions. It doesn't tax the investigative powers of a Sherlock Holmes, Presiding Officer, to detect that I have been at more than a few business dinners over the past wee while. Duty calls, of course, in the service of the nation. I was departing from my script here slightly, actually. And in the course of that duty, I've had the great pleasure of meeting visitors from many countries in august bodies, such as the Professional Convention Management Association, who bring together all of those in the world who organise the most important conferences and conventions in the world, and the most lucrative. And also trailblazers, those who arrange the most lucrative incentive holidays for large companies such as Allianz of Austria, an event I attended in the Signet Library, with other similar events. And it is clear that they look for something unique, an event and a venue, something that Scotland can offer that money alone can't buy. And we are committed to spreading the benefits of this across Scotland. This is a key segmentation of the market, and one where an urban location is not necessarily an advantage or the sole advantage. The Scottish Government will provide a response to the points made by the Economy, Energy and Enterprise Committee in the report in the winning years published on Monday. But it's timely that paragraph 29 states that the committee wants to ensure that rural areas benefited from tourism as well as the major cities. And I heard the convener of that committee opining to that effect on Radio Scotland just a day or so ago. And we endorse that. Certainly I give way to Margaret MacDonald.
Margaret MacDonald.
Thank the Minister for giving me. And it's just before he moves off, the gentleman that he met that organised the conferences, or knew all about them, what did he say were the priorities for getting conferences?
Minister?
Well, there are a variety of priorities. Obviously, conference managers want to have top-class venues. They want to have splendid hotels, good food and drink. They receive these from Scotland, and we've received some outstanding testimonials to that effect from Scotland. They also want certainty and predictability. Like every other person who makes a deal, they want to get what they pay for. They do not want to be taken advantage of. They want to pay a reasonable price and get an excellent value for that price. Let me just read some of the testimonials that some of the global buyers have made about Scotland from these very visits that I've earlier described, and in further response to Mark McDowell's questions. One of the global buyers said about the visit, "This was the best trip I've been on in 25 years in this business." Another one said, "For me, it has not only been a great experience, but an holistic one. I enjoyed the country, the facilities, the activities, the food, the ambience, the group. Awesome." So these are testimonials which are praise indeed for Scotland. I want to turn to the conference bid fund, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government listened to industry and recognised the value business tourism brings, and we heard their calls about the need to be even more competitive at a global level, and that's why we launched the Conference Bid Fund in March 2012. Now, that fund has provided £2 million over 3 years to match fund bids for major conferences for key sectors. Visit Scotland, to whom much praise is due for the work they've done in the business unit headed up by Neil Brownlee, have estimated that 18 conferences have been secured thus far with the Conference Bid Fund. Now, these 18 conferences are estimated to have an economic impact of £56 million between 2013 and 2020, with a Visit Scotland Conference Bid Fund spend of £527,000. Just in a minute. Presiding Officer, I can't think of many uses to which taxpayers' money has been put that have seen such returns. The total return to the public purse for every pound, and I have one here, spent, £1, has been 53. So this one has been joined by 52 other ones as a result of the overall success of this fund. Yes, I'll happily give way.
A tour de force of arithmetical explanation. Christine Graham.
Am I the tour de force? No. Right, I missed that. Can I just ask you, can I ask you, Minister, of those successful bids, were any from other than urban areas? Because my concern is that rural areas such as the Scottish Borders are absolutely losing out in the Conference Bid Fund.
Minister. Well, Christine Graham is absolutely right, as I've already alluded to, that the successful fund applications to the bid fund have very largely been in Glasgow and Edinburgh, although other locations have benefited, including St Andrews and Dundee. But I totally agree with her, and this is a key message from this debate, and I hope to develop it with all members contributing. We want every part of Scotland to benefit from this bid fund. We can have conferences and events, associations, meetings in every part of Scotland. They need not involve thousands of delegates. They can involve a small number of delegates. The bid fund is for all of Scotland, and one of the key purposes of this debate is to get that message across and to see all members across all parties take this message across Scotland. I will give way. Go ahead.
Thank you very much indeed for taking this. But although the bid fund is excellent and a good use of it has been made already, I think there needs to be an internal programme of explanation and information for the smaller people in the rural areas. I don't think they know about it. So I would think there's a wee programme needed there.
Minister, 2 minutes remaining.
I'm happy to agree that we want to do more to spread information about this. That's why I recently travelled to Aberdeen, that, as the Labour amendment says, has had success, and met with Barney Crockhart there. That's why I'm going to meet with colleagues in Edinburgh. That's why I'm going to be engaging with colleagues in local government in many parts of Scotland to pursue this. You're absolutely right. We do need to extend information about this. After all, it was only launched in March. It's relatively new. The purpose of this debate is in part to promulgate information about the success of this fund. Now, I would like to say, however, that I'm not claiming any particular great credit for this. The credit goes to the people who organise the conferences, who arrange them, who secure them, who put in a power of work. And I'd particularly like to pay tribute to Scott Taylor of Glasgow City Marketing Bureau and his team, and John Sharkey of the SEC and his, Hans Rissman at OBE at the Edinburgh International Conference Centre, and Lucy Bird at Marketing Edinburgh, the Chambers of Commerce, who play such a great role, my friend Gordon Massison of Glasgow City Council, with whom I work closely in relation to these matters, but also Glasgow Airport and Amanda McMillan, who will roll out the red carpet for the leaders of conferences, and also those in universities who play such a key role in bringing so many of the conferences to Scotland. People who work in the Royal Colleges, who have influence, who can persuade their colleagues in these types of organisations that Edinburgh, Glasgow or other places would be great locations for their colleagues to meet and to celebrate and discuss their matters. So, Presiding Officer, I haven't covered everything I meant to. There's about 8 or 12 pages here, which we'll leave to some other time. But I'm very I'm sorry to disappoint members. But I very much look forward to the debate, and I have pleasure in moving the motion in my name.
Many thanks. I now call on Ken McIntosh to speak to and move Amendment 4886.2. Mr McIntosh, 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I can also thank the Minister for his opening contribution, despite the disappearing coin trick and the shameless playing to the gallery, and despite even the two caveats on Labour's amendment. I do welcome his comments, and I think, like and his support for our amendment, and I think, like the two recent debates we've had on tourism, I think there is a general consensus around this chamber and around Scotland that we need to do more to recognise the importance of tourism and business tourism in particular. And in fact, President Officer, in a week which has brought rather gloomy and depressing news on business prospects and on the Scottish economy generally, it is good to have the opportunity this afternoon here in the Scottish Parliament to talk about one area where there is clearly a great potential for growth and which has managed to at least somewhat buck the downward trend during the recession. The closure of Comet follows a number of high street retailers which have gone under, and the decision by Vion to close its whole UK operation merely adds salt to the wound, I think, following their decision to halt production at Halls of Broxburn with a loss of 1,700 jobs. So it's therefore more important than ever that we respond to these developments effectively with a renewed focus on employment from this Government and from Parliament, and with an emphasis on diversifying and supporting our manufacturing sector. But we should also respond to these difficulties by putting an even greater emphasis on ensuring we make the most of expanding sectors such as business tourism. Like the Minister, I think it's worth reminding ourselves of the importance of this industry to Scotland already. We've had a number of debates recently about tourism in general, and the Scottish Government's motion highlights the £2.9 billion in value added it is now worth to the Scottish economy. Within that figure, it is particularly notable that business tourism accounts for 20% of the total tourism expenditure to Scotland, some £878 million per year, and 2.6 million business trips were made to Scotland in 2011. But perhaps as important is the fact that business visitors spend almost twice as much as traditional holiday visitors when they are here, and their custom is less prone to seasonal highs and lows, making it very important for the hotel sector in terms of securing and utilising capacity all year round. And there is also the added incentive of those business tourists returning again as holidaymakers at some point in the future. I'm sure all of us are acutely aware of the importance of competing effectively in the main overseas markets, America, Germany, the Scandinavian countries, Netherlands and France and so on. But it is also perhaps worth highlighting one other statistic, and that is that the rest of the UK, including Scotland itself, accounts for 3/4 of the total tourism expenditure. And certainly without straying into our political differences over the Constitution, I think that union dividend is an important point to bear in mind. I welcome the news from the Minister that the Conference Bid Fund has already started to attract new business tourism to Scotland. This scheme, which is match funded by Scotland's cities, is a very good example of collaborative working between our major cities and Visit Scotland, which is already showing results. And it is the work done by those cities that I want to turn to. It is clear that our cities have been the driving force in attracting business visitors. Yes, business tourism has been somewhat affected by the financial recession, but it is recovering and it is expected to grow, unlike many other areas. I want to single out Glasgow in particular as being at the forefront of that growth, the #1 city for business tourism outside London. And that's not happened by accident. That's happened because of strong and committed leadership from the City Council itself. Gordon Matheson, the leader of Glasgow City Council, has estimated that in the first 6 months of the current financial year alone, conventions and business tourism have brought £120 million into Glasgow's economy, the same amount as they achieved in the whole of the previous year. And without wishing to be overly controversial or spoiling consensus today, it is worth noting that one of the budgetary proposals put up by the combined opposition in Glasgow earlier this year would have reduced funding to the City Marketing Bureau and ceased the Air Route Development Fund, which has brought in so many new flights in and out of Glasgow Airport. Despite this, I am delighted to see the City and the Government working together to make the most of the potential that lies in the hosting of the Commonwealth Games in 2014. New construction, such as the Hydrodome next to the Exhibition and Conference Centre, is just one of the many facilities that will undoubtedly add to Glasgow's attractiveness over the coming years and will be part, I hope, of a very successful Commonwealth Games legacy. Arguably, perhaps the biggest addition we could now make as a country to the success of Glasgow as a city and as a business tourism destination would be to provide a rail link to Glasgow Airport. Modern business travellers expect such connections as a matter of course, and it does reflect poorly, not just on Glasgow, but on the whole country, that neither Edinburgh nor Glasgow has a direct rail connection into the city centres. Investing in transport infrastructure is vital, not just to bring business visitors into our country and into our cities, but then to take those same visitors to more rural destinations, so that our whole country can benefit from any increase in the number of business visitors. And I want to mention Aberdeen too, as there is no doubt that the incoming administration has made a huge sign of its commitment by signing off the £26.2 million, the accumulated debt of the Aberdeen Exhibition and Conference Centre. This proposal will see those historic debts cleared, allowing the centre to focus on the future and developing new ways to bring conferences and events to Aberdeen. It is also worth making the point, following on from yesterday's debate, that the proposed rises in air passenger duty could act as a real disincentive to the business tourism and general tourism market in Scotland. It's quite clear that airports located not just in Scotland but in the north of England are at a distinct disadvantage when it comes to APD, and the fact that this tax is clearly higher than in other comparable countries is not going to increase our attractiveness to foreign, let alone domestic visitors. But, Presiding Officer, I want to come back to some of the reasons why Scotland and our cities are such attractive destinations in the first place. Now, although we can talk about their heritage, their physical beauty, their accessibility, I think often it comes down to the level of service, the friendliness and the hospitality that we offer. And I spoke on this issue at length in our last debate on tourism in June. Certainly Glasgow's hospitality is legendary, and I hope we're able to build on that reputation, whilst perhaps moving away from the association with alcohol consumption that is so often prevalent in some minds. However, we do still need to work on certain areas, and I can just give one example myself, which is when my wife and I were coming back from holiday this year in Glasgow Airport. It was first thing in the morning. In fact, it was the morning after there'd been a fire at Glasgow Airport, and we were delayed. So coming in first thing in the morning, and we stopped off at a 24-hour garage in Paisley to buy some breakfast. And my wife went into the shop and went to pay for the goods, including asking if they had any orange juice. And the one-word response she got across the counter was, dilutin'. Now, I can translate dilutin' as a friendly response, but I think perhaps some of us need to work on our people skills if we're to make the Scottish welcome what we should be. And I remember clearly this chap hadn't been on the Commonwealth Games Disney-style charm school that was talked about in our previous debate. But despite the huge importance of tourism as an industry to Scotland and the potential for further growth in employment, the idea of a career in tourism is still not that attractive to many school or college leavers. Young men in particular will still talk about training as a welder rather than, say, as a waiter or managing an hotel. And we need to do more to demonstrate the opportunities that lie out with that traditional picture of work in Scotland. There are many good examples of college courses and of the training that is available, but unfortunately the industry can still be associated with low rates of pay and with seasonal unemployment and insecurity, which we need to challenge. And just as... I'll give way to Ms MacDonald.
Margaret MacDonald.
Thank the member for giving me. I speak as a proud grandmother whose eldest grandson just this week has started as an apprentice, really, in the hotel industry. He's a graduate. He's never going to get a job in teaching, so he's in the next best thing.
Well, can I echo your remarks there? I think the difficulty is that perhaps attitudes in Scotland still lie a couple of decades behind, though. The industry in Scotland has changed, and tourism as an industry is a far, far more important and more substantial industry than it's ever been. But sometimes our stereotypes of what to expect are forged in previous generations. But just as we need to work on our yes, I will do.
McCullough.
Would you agree that the hospitality industry should actually be looked upon as the same as in France, where it is actually a profession, and it should be treated as such from schools, career service, and also through higher and further education?
Ken McIntosh, 30 seconds, please.
Indeed, I think that's the whole idea, that we boost the status of the industry And I think we can do that through a number of means, including through the way we treat it ourselves in our career service and our schools. But I was making the point that I think rates of pay within the industry, it has a reputation of a very low-paid industry, and that would do a lot to overturn that image of tourism. Presiding Officer, the Government is still pursuing a target of expanding the tourism industry by 50%, but if we have any chance of remotely achieving that goal, then one of the most important areas, one of the biggest contributors, will be by expansion in the number of business visitors. I think that by working together with Government and cities, this can happen. Aberdeen, Glasgow, Edinburgh have also on the way, and I commend the leadership of those councils and the example they've set. I move the amendment in my name.
Many, many thanks. And I would just further remind members wishing to take part in this debate, press the request to speak buttons as soon as possible. I now call on Mary Scanlon. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I also very much welcome this debate on business tourism and indeed welcome the bid fund. I would like to put on record that I thank the Minister for the briefing earlier today, which I certainly found very helpful. We will be supporting the Government motion today and indeed the Labour amendment. And in terms of consensual politics, had Tavish Scott's amendment also been chosen, we would have supported that as well. I would just like to commend Fergus Ewing on turning £1 into £53, and I would say, John Swinney, watch your back. And I would also perhaps say that Fergus can perhaps expect a call from the IMF, the World Bank, or even Mrs Merkel herself. But well done, and I fully support what has been said here. With 28% of all international association conferences held in the UK hosted in Scotland, this is us punching well above our weight. And I think we have to acknowledge the fact that England is not only our closest neighbour, but also our best market for business tourism and spend in Scotland. The Minister talked about the 40% return visits, and, you know, that just has to be worth the investment for the huge multiplier effect. As usual, in looking towards this debate, I went to the Visit Scotland website, and they talk about the Business Tourism Unit working closely with the convention bureaus in Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen and Dundee. And I've heard what the Minister said about conferences, conventions, meetings, business tourism is for all parts of Scotland. And I would also like to remind Visit Scotland that there is life beyond the big cities, and Aviemore and Inverness are absolutely excellent examples of having an ability to host major conferences. And indeed, I would say one of the reasons that the Scottish Open is held at Castle Stewart near Inverness is not only the stunning, wonderful golf course, but the fact that the area could accommodate all the estimated 30,000 plus visitors. But as a constituency MSP for Inverness, I'm sure the Minister would never dare to tell the Inverness Common Good Fund how to spend their money. But I'm sure, like me, he will welcome that they have also allocated funding to attract conferences to Inverness, with a maximum grant of £17,500 for any single application. And I would trust that they would be working with Visit Scotland on this issue. In evidence to the EET Committee, Gavin Ellis rightly raised the issue of investment into the transport infrastructure in terms of road, rail and air routes. And whilst I hear what's being said about the improvements in the train journey times from Inverness to Edinburgh, and I would welcome any improvement, but as a regular traveller since 1999, there's not 1 minute of that time as yet. But I believe it's going to happen, and when it does happen, I would very much welcome it. I would also trust that the same approach taken to business tourism following the Olympics will be taken at the Commonwealth Games. And I think we have moved beyond silo thinking into looking at the advantages that can be gained. And I would trust in the summing up that the Minister would tell us what will be happening there when we have that wonderful opportunity. But to maintain an increase,
John Mason.
Just briefly, thank you for giving way. I wonder if you should accept that in the Olympics, people outside thought that they couldn't come to London because the Olympics were on, and we do not want that message. We want people to come to Glasgow at the same time as the Commonwealth Games are on.
Absolutely. I think there are lessons to be learned from the Olympics, 90% positive, but we also have to look at any deterrents that are there. But to maintain and increase our competitiveness in business tourism, we need to constantly improve what is on offer. This is a global market and a very competitive market. We need to respond to the business needs. The Deloitte Annual Business Travel Survey raises the importance of complementary high-speed internet in rooms, given that 2 out of 3 respondents to the survey say that they work in their hotel room. And also 61% of respondents expect more from hotels with regard to amenities and services. And although not mentioned in the survey, I have absolutely no doubt that broadband speeds and mobile phone coverage is a major factor for business tourism. But at the briefing earlier today, my colleague Murdo Fraser raised the issue of extending the stays of business tourists to Scotland. And I would like to refer back to the previous debate we held here in June. And I mentioned the absolutely excellent Sutherland Trail and the problems visitors had experienced finding any information about it on the Visit Scotland website. The Minister responded, and I quote, "I'm pleased that Visit Scotland has a dedicated walking section on its website as well as other initiatives." So I welcomed this with my naivety at the time, but I was disappointed to see that when you go on to this section on the website, Scotland is broken down into North, Central and South. I have the map here. It omits Orkney, Shetland, the Western Isles and 3/4 of the Highlands. There are 23 walks on the website, from the Annandale Way to the Moray Coast, and a glossy document enticing visitors saying, "Discover Scotland's great trails. There's a surprise round every corner." That is every corner except the north of Scotland. So I would like to ask the Minister if he would look at that again. And I would just like to say the business tourism in Islay with the distilleries is absolutely first class, and I appreciate it's a vital ingredient to the economy of the Highlands and indeed the whole of Scotland.
Thank you very much. We now turn to the open debate. Speeches of 6 minutes, but we're very tight for time, so interventions must be contained within the 6 minutes. Mike Mackenzie, to be followed by Margaret McCulloch.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I feel it's only proper to begin a speech in a debate about tourism to first pay tribute to the man who was credited with single-handedly starting the Scottish tourism industry, Walter Scott. I'm sure he'd be more than surprised to know that he founded an industry that now supports around 10% of employment in Scotland, and that even in these dark days of recession, grew last year at a rate of 9%. When much of the rest of the economy is flatlining, that's a very healthy rate of growth. And it's yet another industry where Scotland bucks the economic trends and outperforms the rest of the UK, taking over 20% of the overall UK tourism spend. And one way or another, every person in Scotland benefits from this dynamic industry, which is why all the members of this Parliament should support it, and why all members should consider themselves as tourist ambassadors for Scotland, talking up Scotland's many virtues. Presiding Officer, if there is a segment of the tourist industry that deserves special consideration, it's business tourism, because business tourism leads to so many other benefits, to business contacts and business contracts, to repeat visits, and to export and investment opportunities for Scotland. And it's worth contemplating why it is that Scotland is so successful in this sector. It seems to me there's something about Scotland that inspires creativity. It wasn't an accident that the Industrial Revolution started here with James Watt's steam engine. It wasn't an accident that the Enlightenment started in Edinburgh and that Adam Smith founded modern economics here in Scotland. And that was a precursor to the modern business landscape that stretches across the globe. These things weren't accidents. There is something about Scotland, something about our landscapes, something about our people, our manner of discourse and our dialogue, although not always in this chamber, but there is something about it that inspires thought and inspires creativity. And business, if it's to be successful, is all about creativity, because creativity leads to innovation, and innovation is the key to success in business, as it is the key to our economic success as a nation. And what better place to refresh tired minds and rediscover a passion for success than in Scotland? That's why business tourism is growing in Scotland. So let's start talking Scotland up, and let's tell the world that we want to do more business. And Scotland's business is no longer centred exclusively on our cities. I'm thinking of the Biomora project at Dunstaffridge near Oban, where we lead the world in marine research with a project that aims to capture the vast productive powers of our oceans in producing biofuel. Think of the business spin-off which will be engendered from that project. And I'm thinking also of EMEC and Orkney, where we lead the world in marine renewables research, and where this has led to the inquiries from Korea, from Japan, and from the US to teach them how to do this. And as these people from other countries learn from us, so we'll also learn from them. And when we learn from each other and do business with each other, these two things go hand in hand. For business is always about mutual benefit, and the best of business is often centred on friendships. But we must, as Mary Scanlon was saying, we must always strive to improve our competitiveness, and we must address the impediments to this successful sector. Dr. Mike Cantley, Chairman of Visit Scotland, appearing in front of the Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee only a couple of weeks ago, said that inbound APD is not about austerity, it's lunacy. And he also said that the UK is only one of 14 EU countries that apply the full rate of VAT on restaurant meals. The average for the rest of the EU is 8.8%, not 20%. And we have got the
1 minute left.
And we have the second highest rate of VAT on accommodation in Europe. The average for the rest of Europe is 10.3%, not 20%. So I agree with Mary Scanlon. We do need to increase our competitiveness, and that's a very good way of doing it. Presiding Officer, I'm forced to wonder in winding up why it is that in the face of all economic wisdom, the UK government persists in overtaxing this area of industry, and in fact any area of industry where Scotland does well or enjoys an advantage. The answer to this question, I think, is self-evident. Unfortunately, a solution is almost on hand.
Thank you very much. I now call Margaret McCulloch to be followed by Dennis Robertson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Let me start by welcoming this opportunity to speak on this topic today and to discuss how we can make Scotland the world-class destination that we all know it can be. This is not the first time in tourism this is not the first debate in tourism that I have participated in, but it is the first I can remember with a specific focus on business tourism, a potential source of growth in the economy, a key component of any successful event strategy, and another way in which we can showcase the very best of Scotland to the world. Exhibitions, trade fairs, meetings and conferences, product launches, corporate functions and even corporate hospitality at other big events, from pop concerts to cup finals, it all brings people together. Not only do those gatherings generate income for local economies, but there is a wider benefit because the deals and transactions that are done and the contacts that are made can contribute to the growth and success of businesses further down the line. Many of the critical factors behind the success of business tourism are not any different to the factors behind the success of the tourism industry as a whole, even in these difficult times for the economy. We all want to give all visitors to our country a good Scottish welcome if we want them to come back, and we want everyone who deals with the public in the service sector, from taxi drivers to hotel porters, to do their bit to make people comfortable and to project a positive image of the country. We have to get the marketing strategy right, not just at the national level, but at the local level too. I have said before that Visit Lanarkshire is the product of a strong collaboration between the visitor accommodation sector and visitor attractions, and it is a model of partnership working that other parts of Scotland could learn from. We have to make sure that our workforce has the right mix of skills, not just in customer service and hospitality, but in events management, advertising and in modern languages. The CBI and Scottish Enterprise have both warned that because Scotland is falling behind with language education, we are losing out on income and investment. It could be costing the Scottish economy as much as £500 million per year. We have to raise our game in modern languages, and I welcome the suggestion that foreign languages should be introduced to children at an early age in their education, and that an additional language should be introduced as they progress through school. We also have to be conscious that if we are to shift the focus of our exporters towards the BRIC nations and other emerging economies, then our language courses and our wider understanding of foreign cultures will have to become more diverse. We will always teach the major European languages like French and Spanish, but the case for teaching other languages like Portuguese and Russian is stronger than ever. Presiding Officer, a world-class destination needs world-class infrastructure. Connectivity within Scotland and connectivity between Scotland and other key destinations is central to our future prosperity. There has to be joined-up thinking in our approach to tourism and in our approach to transport, as there is in many other countries. HS2 will reduce journey times between Scotland and London, and a high-speed connection between Glasgow and Edinburgh will be a great boost in one of our most valuable transport corridors. But, Presiding Officer, let me be clear that I remain unconvinced that the reduction in Egypt amounts to savings. Those are cuts totalling £350 million that will see electrification put on hold and critical enhancements to the capacity of the rail line scrapped. If we are serious about developing this high-value sector and all its potential, then we need to have transport links that sit at the top of the league, up there with the best in the world. The final point I would make is that our real legacy benefits to have a strong and competitive business tourism industry. The venues which are so central to the success of business tourism have helped generate city centres all across the United Kingdom, breathing new life into spaces that were neglected after the decline of traditional industries. Big national events can produce substantial gains that last longer than the event itself. I worked in the Glasgow Garden Festival in the 1980s. It was a great event and it marked a real turning point for the city. But for a number of reasons, not least economic problems of the late 1980s, much of that land remained derelict until relatively recently.
1 minute left.
As we develop the venues and the infrastructure that we need to grow this end of the tourism industry, we have to be prepared to invest and to innovate to secure lasting benefits to our economy. Presiding Officer, like the Government, I recognise the growing contribution that business tourism is making to the Scottish economy. Business tourism can add value in all seasons in all kinds of ways, and it can leave a legacy of regeneration, growth and new opportunities. The challenge for the Government is to support this sector through these tough times and to plan for better times by helping Scotland to secure the skills, the infrastructure and the investment we need if we are truly to be one of the best destinations in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Dennis Robertson to be followed by Colin Beattie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It will come as no surprise to the Minister that I'm probably going to focus most of my attention in the north east of Scotland. And in terms of Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire. But first of all, Presiding Officer, can I say that I would love to invest £1 with the Minister and hopefully get a good return at the end of the week. Presiding Officer, the north east of Scotland and Aberdeenshire have a fantastic story to tell. And when we're looking at business tourism, there's probably no better place in Scotland. We have an infrastructure there with Aberdeen Airport actually seeing a growth in their business over the last year or so, and it continues to grow. And in fact, the Aberdeen plans to develop their airport into an airport city are actually taking shape. We will have new accommodation, hotel accommodation, office accommodation, and perhaps some shops, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, this is to attract the business community. We have a hub of business in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, and the energy sector is that central hub. The energy sector brings people from all parts of the world, North America. It brings people from the Middle East, and recently we have people interested from China. Presiding Officer, the city in itself has a lot to offer, but in the periphery, the Shire, we actually have just as much, and if not more, in terms of the scenery, the beauty, etc. And this is where we would need to encourage the companies when they're bringing people over to look at investing and future investment within Scotland, and in particular the North East, is we need to ensure that they get a feel for the country and the culture that we have as well. It's extremely important, Presiding Officer, that people understand that Scotland isn't about bagpipes, kilts and shortbread. However, if they do visit Huntly, they can visit the factory at Dean's, and they will get probably the best shortbread in Scotland. Yes?
Mary Scanlon.
I thank the members for giving way. Given the enormous demand in the North East, Aberdeen in particular, for hotel beds, does he also welcome Mr Trump's development and the extension of accommodation facilities in the North East?
Dennis Robertson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Well, I want to stay positive in this debate, Presiding Officer. And can I say that any future development is also a welcomed development, Presiding Officer. We have some fantastic hotel accommodation, and in fact in Royal Deeside it probably sells itself. But in areas like Strathdon, we actually have fantastic facilities. And Presiding Officer, there's an area called Lost. It's a place to be found. I can assure you, Presiding Officer, I can assure you that it is somewhere in terms of those that enjoy their walking within the Cairngorms will actually have a fantastic time. But this is about business and encouraging business back into our communities. The offer of business tourism. The Minister gave a statement to the Economy, Energy and Tourist Committee in September of this year. And he said for an investment, and Minister, forgive me for rounding up the figures, it was about £322,000 with a return of 37 million, an expected return of 37 million. Now, my maths is probably not as good as the Minister's, and I believe that was probably a 1 in 56 return, but I stand to be corrected, Presiding Officer. We have fantastic facilities, we have a wonderful culture, but in truth we have an open door for business. And it's that as business that will bring growth, and that growth will engender more opportunities for the people of Scotland. But we need to ensure that when we're taking our message across the world, whether it be China, India, Brazil, whether it be Africa, whether it be in the Middle East, we need to ensure that when they come to Scotland, we can give them the hospitality that they deserve. Presiding Officer, the Minister mentioned Stephen Leckie. And Stephen Leckie, for many years, has been in the forefront of asking for a reduction in VAT for the hotel sector. Presiding Officer, this is something that needs to be looked at, and it needs to be looked at urgently. And I sincerely hope that in the budget coming up, perhaps the Chancellor of the Exchequer would actually look at reducing the VAT for the hotel sector and restaurants. Presiding Officer, APD has also been mentioned yesterday in a debate and here this afternoon. It is something else which should be devolved to this Parliament. However, if we wait long enough to 2014, all powers will be devolved to this Parliament, and then we can address the problem ourselves. Presiding Officer, remaining, hopefully, on a consensual note. Presiding Officer, hopefully remaining consensual, I sincerely hope that opening the door to Scotland is a door that we can encourage our business communities to come to and walk through and enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Colin Beattie to be followed by Duncan McNeill.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I can say that I have considerable experience of business tourism, since I was a business tourist for some 30 years. In fact, given the level of business travel which I have in the past undertaken, I could easily have qualified as a secret shopper. In general, my experience of being a business tourist has been very mixed as to how pleasurable or not that experience has been. Let me share with you some of the key factors which I and my then colleagues valued in a visit. Spare time, of course, was always at a premium. No one wanted to waste that precious time. So firstly, we preferred a hotel in the centre of town, but not too far from the airport. Better access to facilities. Secondly, we liked nearby quality restaurants and pubs. Thirdly, we liked availability of tourist attractions. Close by was really good. Just a few photos to prove to your spouse that you'd actually been there. And fourth, availability of tourist shops or shops for the local content. We all needed to bring back some tourist tat to spouses and family, and often this was done somewhat hurriedly, and having a good choice was important. Now, Scotland would have been a popular choice to visit, since it can tick all the basic boxes. And it was really unfortunate that only once in all these years did I ever attend an event in Edinburgh. And alas, I was already living here, so it really wasn't the same. But business tourists tend to spend more money than leisure tourists. Firstly, they're on expenses as far as accommodation, transport and food is concerned, hence they feel less inhibited by costs. Secondly, they tend to be less discriminating, since they have less time to look around and to decide on purchases or local destinations. Therefore, it's not surprising that the spend by business tourists is more than 1.5 times higher than that of leisure tourists. Scotland benefits by some £878 million per annum, up an impressive 8% on 2010, while business tourism itself amounts to some 20% of the total tourism spend in Scotland. Understanding the drivers behind business tourism is therefore very important if Scotland is to continue to grow and to benefit from this industry sector. Sustainable tourism is a key growth sector for the Scottish Government. And to my mind, there are broadly two key elements to business tourism, and the first relates to conferences and conventions. Here, the need is to sell Scotland as a great place to have a conference, both based on price, given the constraints in company budgets during a period of financial austerity, and on personal preferences of those organising and attending. The second relates to business travellers, who typically would extend a day or two to look around or at the very least squeeze time out during the working day to view very local sites. In both cases, there's a need to invest, and this is particularly so in the main cities where business tourists end up. Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee and Aberdeen being the main destinations. In either of the two key elements I've described, there's a need to invest in our tourist infrastructure, and I'm pleased to see that the Scottish Government is doing so. Some examples are Historic Scotland offering their historic facilities for hire as event centres, and this has been happening for many years, and business tourism has been targeted since 1998, and Historic Scotland has consistently invested in these facilities. Visit Scotland promotes Scotland as a venue for conferences and conventions, and in 2010-11 generated business to the value of £121 million. Visit Scotland has also benefited from the new conference bid fund announced by Fergus Ewing in March 2012, which offers £2 million over the next 3 years and aims to make Scotland more competitive in the international conference market. Event Scotland promotes sporting and cultural events and invested £3.7 million in the events industry in 2010-11. This generated some £57.5 million in additional revenue for our economy. Scottish Enterprise itself gives advice and support to over 100 key tourist businesses, and clearly I welcome the investment and the effort being focused on this important sector. I've already touched on the fact that we're in the midst of a period of financial austerity, and while this remains with us, it's encouraging to see some indications of a continuing recovery in this market, even if it is slow and a little uneven. However, there is little doubt that such recovery may remain fragile until such time as the general economic situation shows more solid signs of improvement. Cost may remain a key factor, and margins may suffer as a result. It is therefore important that the Scottish market stakeholders continue to provide good value for money and to invest into this sector.
1 minute left.
We've got many competitors in this market, not the least being the rest of the UK, USA, Germany and Spain, to name the main ones. But I believe that Scotland can and will compete successfully. Our track record is second to none in the tourism industry. When times are hard, there are challenges, but there are also opportunities. and I believe that if we continue to keep a strong focus on this important area, then Scotland as a destination for conferences, conventions and for business travellers in general will continue to prosper and to expand. Scotland has a great deal to offer delegates and business visitors in general, in terms of world-class venues, spectacular scenery, fantastic quality food and drink, historic sites, golf and much more. Presiding Officer, I commend the work which has and is being done and look forward to seeing the success these efforts deserve.
Thank you. I now call Duncan McNeill to be followed by Chick Brodie.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm asking myself the question here in the debate, why am I speaking in a debate about business tourism? And I asked some people that earlier on, from Inverclyde, why am I in this debate at all? But I put my mind to it, and I think, first of all, I'm here today to recognise from one of those communities that was based on traditional industries, to recognise the potential of tourism in the widest sense. And as we know, and can't believe it actually, that we have saw Inverclyde, Greenock turned into a gateway for in excess of 60,000 passengers to Scotland every year. And we're only constrained by the physical resources. And this week, and we've had positive discussions with the Scottish Government ministers in terms of looking at a bid to extend that key and that key side. And this week, I had an update from the Scottish Enterprise and the Urban Regeneration Company exactly moving that on that should increase the passengers. Of course, they flow out of the area because they come to visit Glasgow and Edinburgh, but there are significant benefits for us locally. And I suppose the next question I'm asking is, we're looking for a bit of that in return. We are the gateway, they flow into Glasgow and everything else, and we'll never be able to compete with conferences and big venues. But we ask Glasgow in particular to recognise the wider offer. That experience that people will have here shouldn't just be bound to the city experience. We should be making those connections out into places like Inverclyde, where 20 minutes away you can be sailing in conditions that Shea Blythe considers some of the best sailing in the world on the Firth of Clyde, less than an hour from SCC. You could come down, I suppose, and arrange to have lunch in one of those massive cruise liners that come and visit. You could also visit Waterloo Road, one of the most the film set of Waterloo Road, which is one of the most popular dramas in the UK, with 5 million visitors every week. But the important point is that we recognise that getting people into that area transforms their mindset of an old shipyard town, and they also see the potential of that area for the future. And of course, it's not only that in terms of the sense of pride that people have in the area, and they welcome visitors there. Finally, I think we're also given notice that we want to break into that small conference business market. We are now in the process, very shortly, opening up the new Beacon Arts Centre, which has been supported by successive governments here at the Scottish Parliament, the Lottery, which is a 500-seat theatre, which gives us, I think, a real opportunity to work in that market and make a claim for those small conferences. Maybe a new hotel will spring up out of that in terms of to support that initiative, working alongside the budget hotels that are already in the area, or indeed Gleddock House, where you've got all the leisure facilities, golf and everything else, with spectacular views over the Clyde, only 20 minutes from Glasgow Airport. So I think, while we recognise that we're never going to compete with the big boys, I think it's very, very important that they recognise that the wider offer, the facilities that are on their doorstep, that will enhance the experience of those people who attend those conferences. And while my comments might be ambitious, they might be speculative. I think what is certain, I think I can say for all of those who have experienced a visit to Inverclyde, well, these comments may be ambitious and speculative. There is nothing uncertain about the welcome and the warm welcome that visitors will get when they arrive in Inverclyde. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. I now call Chick Brodie to be followed by Tavish Scott.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. While delighted to speak in this debate today, I regret having missed the debate on APD yesterday. I was, along with others on
Mr Brodie, sorry, could you turn your microphone round a wee bit? It wasn't picking you up very well.
Sorry?
Thanks very much.
All right. I was, along with others on the Petition Committee at the Welsh Assembly yesterday, where coincidentally they were having a hearing also on the effect of APD on tourism. There is no doubt that APD, along with VAT, the lack of direct flights and the visa shambles mitigates against success in tourism generally and business tourism particularly, and defies some of the good work that our tourist agencies do. Deputy Presiding Officer, talking with some Chinese businessmen recently, I was appalled to be told that when 7 of them applied to come to Scotland on business, they were restricted by quota by the embassy to a total of 5. Of course, none of them then came. In the consensuality of the nature of this debate, I have to admit I smiled yesterday when reading the story of Arriva coming to Scotland, that Mr Cameron, the Prime Minister, believes, and I quote, "I am determined that Britain competes and thrives in the global race." Well, he can help our business tourism by asking his Chancellor to reduce APD and VAT drastically. He can ask his Foreign Secretary to sort out the VAT shambles, and he can ask his Transport Secretary to insist that the Transport Review considers direct flights to Scotland. Presiding Officer, having worked for several multinationals and run 8 companies across Europe, I know it is critical to business tourism that we increase the global corporate footprint here in Scotland, more corporate headquarters. And in that effort, I can only praise the great work of Scottish Enterprise and SDI in the attractions that they've made so far. And I would hope, and I'm sure there will be, even greater coordination, cohesion between Scottish Enterprise, SDI and Visit Scotland under the umbrella of the Strategic Economic Forum to attract more businesses and, by default, business tourists to Scotland. In my careers with NCR, IBM, Digital, Wang and Tandem, I well remember the influx of colleagues from the US, from Japan and Europe, many of whom brought their spouses and extended their stays, and then the many who kept coming back even after they left the companies. I also well remember us Tandem taking over 1/3 of Gleneagles Hotel. I don't quite as well remember the night at the Tullibardine Distillery, but I'm sure I enjoyed it. So for business tourism, the attraction of corporates, their subsidiary units, their manufacturing entities, has to be an overarching objective for business and business tourism. So as it was in Silicon Glen, let it be in renewables, food and drink and life sciences. We have to build on the estimated £900 million of business tourism as there was in 2011, 19% as it is of total tourism expenditure, but not because of increased volume, although that's important, but because it is estimated that that sector spends 1.5 times that of the leisure tourism sector. In quoting these numbers, Deputy Presiding Officer, it is important, very important, that we have the processes and the ICT systems that crystallise the numbers so we know exactly how we are growing. The success of our achievement, as the Minister said, will be contingent upon the joint success of the business tourism unit, our universities, our local authorities, our regional tourism forums, and the private sector to stimulate activity and infrastructure build to meet our national objective. And while I applaud, and rightly, the current 53 applications to the Conference Bid Fund, and specifically recognise the efforts of Glasgow, Scott Taylor and his marketing team in securing some outstanding conferences for Glasgow, particularly those in the life sciences and medical area, our business tourism cannot be, I suggest, city-centric only, nor product-centric. The Business Tourism Unit of Visit Scotland states that outside the main cities there are only 31 places in Scotland which can seat over 500 people, theatre style. The successful pursuit of Scotland as a global business tourism centre to the corporates I mentioned for conferences, conventions, sales achievement programmes, exhibitions, trade fairs, and I could go on, will only be attained if we are ready to beat the global competition.
A minute left.
That means spreading our reach to show our service worth, our natural resources and our assets out with the cities also. That also means increasing connectivity and business tourism attractions in the borders, in the islands and the highlands. Shovel-ready, service-ready, it comes to mind. We have good and in some cases excellent tourism and business tourist agencies. I am delighted to support this motion in the name of the Government and also the amendments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Tavish Scott to be followed by Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I entirely agree with Mr Brodie's final point there about the importance of business tourism being rather wider than just Glasgow, Edinburgh and Gleneagles, good as they are. And let me give a concrete example to the Minister as to an action that his government could take which would specifically help not just Shetland but also Orkney, the Western Isles, the Argyll Islands, Wick and the far north, all areas that he's familiar with. And that is to reintroduce the business component of the air discount scheme. Now, the air discount scheme was a very good scheme introduced some years ago by a previous government, but carried on by Stuart Stevenson, the first SNP Transport Minister after 2007. And Mr Stevenson, to his great credit, ensured that the scheme continued as it had done previously, approved by the European Commission, and therefore provided a 40% discount on what I'm sure the Minister would recognise as a pretty high level of fares across the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. And I say again, I was grateful to Mr Stevenson at that time for continuing that scheme. He I thought, made an eminently sensible decision. Now, since then, the government have changed their position on the business component part of that scheme. And had they cited finance as the main reason for that, I would have had some sympathy with that. I might not have necessarily agreed and argued for a different set of priorities, but I certainly would have accepted any minister's right to make that judgment call. But what I found somewhat difficult to take was the use of the European Commission as a convenient way of saying this scheme had to change. And that isn't the case. It's not the case now. It wasn't the case then. So perhaps I could gently ask Mr Ewing to bring his considerable talents to bear on another part of his government and his colleagues to see if he could reintroduce that scheme, because it genuinely would make a considerable difference to the areas of Scotland that I've suggested, and very much be in line with the point that Mr Brodie and indeed members across the Chamber have made about ensuring that the conference and business tourism market that the Minister introduced some moments ago can develop not just in our great cities and indeed in our very fine resorts such as Gleneagles and St Andrews, but also in different parts of the country. Can I also commend Mr Robertson's earlier remarks about oil and gas? I can absolutely share that perspective, and not just about Aberdeen, also Aberdeen's close to my heart, as I've spent too many years going through it by boat or plane, but also because of his observations about the oil and gas industry. Certainly at home in Shetland, we see a huge amount of business tourism because of that industry. It is said, and I think Mr Robertson might probably agree with this, that getting a taxi, or more to the point, a hotel bed in Aberdeen any time through our normal working week is nigh on impossible. There have been occasions when I have been trying to get home and not managed it because the flight has been cancelled, that I have been put up in all parts of Scotland, literally, rather than close to Dice for the flight, for that ghastly early flight home on a Friday or a Saturday morning. So I entirely endorse Mr Robertson's remarks with respect to the importance of the oil and gas industry and what it means for business tourism, particularly in the northeast of Scotland. Can I also bring to the Minister's attention the growth of the advertising industry and their use of different locations around Scotland. I must confess I was pretty ignorant of this until Friday night at home, when I found out that a major mobile phone company had been filming an advert in Shetland for the past week. 45 crews staying in 3 different hotels in the north of Shetland, with 6 full trucks of kit that had come all the way from London. I can only but guess at the spend, not just in the pub I met them in on Friday night, but also in hotels, restaurants, and with local people providing everything from quad bikes to trailers in order to take their kit around the west of Shetland where they were filming this advert. Apparently, this is all to produce something on television which will last less than 30 seconds and involves ponies breakdancing. Now, this is a concept I'm not entirely familiar with, and I can only commend YouTube for no doubt when the advertisement appears. But believe me, if it brings money into my community, I'm allowed to endorse ponies breakdancing. More seriously, perhaps, can I commend the Minister's use of his statistics earlier on, and particularly the point he made about 40% of business tourists returning. The other numbers that jumped at me, and I forget if they're in Mr Fraser's report that was published on Monday. They may well have been in a report that I had something to do with, 5 or 6 years ago, when the previous Economy Committee also looked into tourism, but that 28% of all international association conferences held in the United Kingdom are hosted by Scotland, and that Edinburgh and Glasgow are second only to London in the UK in terms of number of international association conferences. That does, as the Minister said, seem to me a huge potential for growth for Scotland, but I think it does relate to transport. And I was very taken with Mr McIntosh's observations about the Air Route Development Fund, a mechanism that Glasgow City Council has used. Mr Ewing will remember from a previous iteration of his career in the past that Air Route Development Fund was a mechanism that we used in the past. Again, I appreciate there were European challenges to that, but if, in fairness to our colleagues at Glasgow City Council, if they have found a way around that, I can only commend them for doing so, because the argument has been used by business lobby organisations, indeed by the kind of companies that Mr Brodie was mentioning earlier on, for years, is that direct air links into Scotland, to some extent avoiding the hubs of London, Amsterdam and Frankfurt, would be enormously beneficial in terms of how this whole business tourism industry develops. And one final observation, Deputy Presiding Officer, that is that maybe Mr Ewing could just make sure that when he next comes through passport control to Edinburgh, we work very hard on the point Mr McIntosh is making about a nice welcome to Scotland.
Thank you. I now call Stuart McMillan to be followed by Anne McTaggart.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I think it's been a consensual debate so far, and sometimes kind of quite humorous. Actually, I think Tabby Scott, I'd recommend it speaks to my colleague Chick Brodie later, because when you mentioned about the breakdancing ponies, he said he's got one of them. So we'll have a wee chat with him later. I think I think certainly, Presiding Officer, I mean, we know that Scotland does have a tremendous amount to actually offer, between its people, the golf, the whisky, the food and the drink, the cultural events, the bagpipes and the tartan, Dennis Robertson, and the sporting events, including the world-class sailing off the west coast. We can't also forget about something that's going on at the moment, also the current constitutional debate, which is certainly putting Scotland into the gaze of the wider world. I think it's certainly making Scotland a more interesting and fascinating place for people to come and visit. We've already heard a number of the facts and statistics, and so I'm not going to go over kind of all of the ground, but I think it's important just to highlight even just a couple of the points that we've heard from earlier. Now, Visit Scotland estimate now that meetings, incentives, conferences and events, the MICE events, it actually brings in around £870 million per annum. That's 19% of our overall tourism, of the business tourism, and also the 28% of all international association conferences held in the UK are held in Scotland. Now, Neil Brownlee, head of Visit Scotland's Business Tourism Unit, said that Scotland has so much to offer delegates in terms of our world-class venues, our spectacular scenes, our spectacular scenery, our fantastic food and drink, our history, our golf, and so much more. I really couldn't have said it and put it better myself. We have the product. We have some world-class establishments. We have improving service provision at all levels, and we also have the people with the drive and the passion to continue to improve the tourism product, particularly the business tourism product, and certainly none more so than people like Stephen Leckie.
Now, Stephen Leckie is the chair of the Scottish Tourism Leadership Group and also the Scottish Tourism Alliance. Now, his infectious desire is to make Scottish tourism the best. Not the best for any small country, but the Scottish tourism sector the best. His forward in the refreshed Scottish tourism strategy, the Tourism Scotland 2020, highlights the focus on the sector. It's a strategy for the industry, by the industry. I think those comments are just so apt, and also it highlights that it's a strategy that's going from the bottom up as compared to going from the top down. Now, the Tourism Leadership Group, which produced the refreshed strategy, and the Scottish Tourism Alliance, who will monitor the delivery of the strategy, are pivotal in driving Scotland's offering forward. And I'm convinced that they will succeed, and as a consequence, so will Scotland. Now, they will have challenges, they will have some ups and downs, but the challenge certainly for us politicians, and certainly for the politicians outside of this Parliament, is to actually help them when it's required, not give them a public mauling. Now, the next 2 years are important for Scotland. The continuation of the Winning Year strategy, with what will be 2 of the world's top-class events coming to the country, are huge opportunities. The Ryder Cup will put Scotland into the driving seat, sorry for the pun, from a golfing perspective, and the Commonwealth Games will put Glasgow into the front foot from a wider sporting perspective. Now, with the hundreds of millions being invested in Glasgow by the Scottish Government in sporting infrastructure, accommodation, the staffing and transport links to make the Games a success, I'm sure that in their heart of hearts, those who claimed that Glasgow was actually being ripped off know it actually to be an inaccurate claim. Now, I warmly welcome the conference bid fund, and it also has had a tremendous amount of success so far. Now, Glasgow has done well with thousands of additional people coming to Scotland and going to come to Scotland in coming years, and this will certainly be a huge boost to the Glasgow economy. That the collaborative working of this Scottish Government with the City Council and Glasgow Marketing Bureau is one that should be emulated. Sure.
Duncan McNeill. Can I have Duncan McNeill's microphone? Thank you.
I'm sure the member will agree that there's a great opportunity for places like Inverclyde with the Commonwealth Games, not just the sporting links, but the cultural links, that many of the grandparents and ancestors of those participants in the Commonwealth Games from Australia, New Zealand and Canada actually left these shores from Greenock, and more could be done to ensure that they walk the streets that their forefathers walked.
Stuart McMillan, and you're coming up to your last minute.
Sure, okay. Thank you. Absolutely. I mean, Inverclyde has got a tremendous opportunity to really kind of make so much more of tourism, and I'm coming on to Inverclyde in a moment. Certainly, in terms of kind of business tourism, now it comes in all shapes and all sizes, whether it's from the large conferences coming to likes of the cities, as well as kind of smaller events. I mean, earlier on this year, I'm aware of an organisation based in Gourock, Celestica. They actually had a small kind of conference of the VPs coming to Gourock from across the world. They stayed at the Inverkip Hotel, and they did this because of the stunning location. Now, it would have been too small to qualify for any assistance through the bid fund, because it only involved about 8 people, but it was important to the economy that it served. Certainly for the future for Inverclyde, the Beacon Arts Centre, with the 500 seats, and it's now one of the locations on the 31 locations outside of the cities. That is a wonderful opportunity that can actually bring conferences into Inverclyde. And certainly, I mean, I highlighted the point to Malcolm Roughhead some months ago about the Beacon, and I'm pleased he actually took that up and forwarded it on to his colleagues within Visit Scotland. Now, certainly, the bigger cities, they've got plenty of space. Smaller locations have a shortage of bed space, and that is the case across the West as well. But certainly, in terms of kind of going forward, I mean, there are wonderful opportunities for the West of Scotland, wonderful opportunities for Inverclyde with the Beacon Arts Centre, and also with the number of folk who left Inverclyde many years ago, going to the New Worlds. But certainly, I'm biased that there is so much more that actually can be done, and so much more can be done within Inverclyde. And I'm biased, but certainly anyone who comes to Inverclyde will get a tremendous welcome, and also no one can actually compete against it for its stunning location. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Anne McTaggart to be followed by Christine Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am delighted to contribute to this important debate on the subject of business tourism, and I thank Fergus Ewing for securing this time to raise some of the key issues around visitor numbers to Scotland and the economic benefits that this can bring. Firstly, I would like to highlight the excellent record of Glasgow City Council in attracting corporate and commercial visitors to our city. Regularly hosting national and international conferences and gaining a strong reputation as a city that means business. As I am sure all members will be aware, Glasgow has secured a position as the #1 destination for business tourism in the UK outside of London. This is due in no small part to the support of the City Council for the tourism sector in Glasgow and the vision and foresight of the Labour administration that has attracted and sustained investment that already exists. In particular, our hospitality sector has enjoyed expansion as a result of the high level of support from the City Council in Glasgow, and new hotels and guest houses have been well supported in attracting business and leisure tourists to Scotland's largest city. These new businesses have been instrumental in delivering new jobs for Glasgow's young people and have proved to be resilient in an otherwise struggling economic reality. Whilst Glasgow benefits hugely from the business tourism sector in Scotland, we also know that other major cities such as Edinburgh, Dundee and Aberdeen can attribute a significant proportion of an inward investment to facilitating conferences, international meetings, conventions and exhibitions. Part of the reason for this is, of course, the broad range of facilities that our major Scottish cities can offer tourists, in the form of conference centres, well-equipped meeting spaces, theatres and galleries. Equally, international visitors require a well-developed transport network that is able to link city centres, train stations, business centres and airports all efficiently and without unnecessary delays or costs incurred in the process. This is why I believe investment in transport infrastructure is the key for further growth in this important sector and must be a central focus of efforts to sustain the current benefit to Scotland of over £809 million annually. Scotland must position itself to be a leading player globally and to compete with other UK and international cities that may also be well placed to deliver for the business tourists and their needs. Yes, certainly.
Dennis Robertson.
I thank the member for taking an intervention. Will the member acknowledge that perhaps in the north east of Scotland we are a global player in terms of the energy sector, and that next year, in terms of subsea conferencing in February and the offshore Europe in September, will probably attract more than 98 different countries to the north east?
Anne McTaggart.
The member sure does acknowledge that and congratulates you for that. It is clear that to realise this ambition, we must build transport links for our visitors that are faster, cheaper and more efficient. We must focus on connecting travel hubs with their city centres and building a comprehensive network and onward connections so that many of our towns and cities can benefit from high visitor numbers to Scotland. It is incredibly frustrating that this process has already been so significantly inhibited by the SNP's decision to cancel the Glasgow Airport railway link. And disappointing to understand that there is no current plans to re-establish the proposals for this particular scheme. Now is the time for the Scottish Government to boost the tourism sector in Scotland by looking again at the transport networks that service our visitors and to start planning for the future on how we will deliver a first-class service for all of Scotland's business and leisure tourists. The Scottish tourism sector employs over 200,000 people across the country and indirectly supports many more of our businesses through increased spending and visitor numbers in our towns and cities. In a highly competitive marketplace, Scotland must now do all it can to support tourism and sustain the businesses and the families that rely on the strength of this industry. In particular, business tourism can offer unique opportunities for the Scottish economy in bringing high numbers of individuals to Scotland to enjoy our unique facilities and resources and to promote Scotland as a first-class business destination worldwide.
Thank you very much. I now call Christine Graham to be followed by Roderick Campbell.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. We've had pony break dancing, Chick Brodie claiming he's training one. You can tell we're all desperately trying to zizz up this debate. Then there was MICE. MICE, at least that's an acronym to toy with. Meetings, incentives, conferences, exhibitions, events. You learn something every day, whether you want to or not. And then we have Dennis, am I from the North East, Robertson. Yes, I too am impressed with returns from the Bank at Fergus. Crumbs, I'm bored with my speech already. Though there are lots of local press releases littered throughout members' speeches, so it's not all bad then. In anticipation of this debate, however, I did a rough survey of hotels across my constituency. I can be as parochial as the rest of you. Against the background of the concerns of the Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee on the Winning Years project, which looks to maximise from all that happens from now until 2014 on major events in Scotland. And I noted, and we've all seen this, that it appears to be focused more on urban and rural areas may not equally benefit. And I think a few of us have now got into the fight about that. I'll give you a prime example. Commonwealth Games in Glasgow. Where are they holding the Rugby Sevens? Well, they're not holding in Melrose, home of the Rugby Sevens. So much for rural places getting their fair share. So, while I welcome the two... Pardon? Oh, I'm just... Please! I hope you're still awake. That's a compliment.
John Mason.
I thank the member for giving way. I just wonder if she would agree that if we could get businesses to come to, say, Glasgow or Edinburgh, and then 40% of these people come back again, then it's likely they are going to go to the borders and the Highlands and elsewhere.
No. Christine Graham, can I ask members not to sit with their backs to the chair? Thank you very much.
No, it wouldn't happen. So it's a no. So I welcome the 2 million, but we know that none of the rural places are getting it. They're not applying, and frankly, they didn't know about it. So we have business tourism. We're really looking at the major cities, and actually, apart from the North East, we have the Central Belt. Now, when I did my survey, part of my usual business surgeries, I went round several areas and hotels in the borders that are quite useful for them. Cardrona near Peebles. Now, recently that had the Prison Officers Association conference. It can hold conferences. The Hydro at Peebles frequently has the Police Federation conferences. Traquair extends to book festivals and smaller conferences. We have the Tweed Horizons, which has a whole wide range of facilities. The Tontine, again, that's in Peebles. I use it myself for meetings. And Stobo, which will recognise some of the ladies, perhaps some of the gentlemen, for its spa facilities, but also holds business conferences. Abbotsford House, which is now being brought back to its prime, home, as I understand, of the founder of tourism, Sir Walter Scott. And that is, again, going to be open to... It has a wonderful visitor centre, just opened, absolutely available. However, having said that, here are the problems, Minister. Transport links, particularly to the Peebles-Traquair side, are a huge issue raised by many. Lack of natural exposure of the borders, national exposure of the borders by Visit Scotland has been brought to my attention, tends to focus on the Highlands and Islands and possibly the North East. Linked to the high cost of business advertising. I think...
Mary Scanlon.
Yes, I have to say for the Highlands, in comparison to the borders, that at least the borders are on the south of Scotland walking map for Visit Scotland. The Highlands and the Islands don't even exist.
Christine Graham.
Well, I didn't know that Highlands and Islands would be in the south of Scotland walking map, but I've maybe got my geography wrong there. Can I also say to Chick Brodie, apart from his training of horses, he's right about connectivity. The speed of broadband and mobile reception is a big issue if you're holding a business conference. Now, on the... have I finished my negatives? No. The other negative is many were unaware of the conference bid fund. I've said that. And I do think we need to do more than just have this debate about it. It has to be taken proactively out to the medium to smaller sized businesses. Now, on the plus side, Minister, many who had met with you and heard you speak thought you were a decent chap and liked the cut of your jib. That's it. July... Yes?
Dennis Robertson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Dennis Robertson from the North East of Scotland. Presiding officer, I think Christine Graham, if she looks at the positives, will see that places like Peebles Hydro, for instance, and I know I've been to Crieff Hydro, Peebles Hydro, Dunblane Hydro for various conferences, such as ophthalmic and optometry ones, they have the facilities to hold these venues. Christine Graham should promote those to the Royal Associations and colleges.
Christine Graham, 1 minute left.
I am doing that. You're looking at a Borders Business Tourism Ambassador in the making. I want to finish by saying that the jury was out in Visit Scotland, which talks a good talk, but they weren't convinced it walks the walk. There's the issues about dispersal of business tourism to areas such as the Scottish borders, and no rail will help the central borders, but it won't do very much to the west. So I ask the Minister to liaise, I am sure he does regularly, with the Cabinet Secretary for Infrastructure, as that is more than incidental to providing dispersal of that. That's my end of my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call Roderick Campbell to be followed by Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Tourism is without a doubt an enormous plus for Scotland. Scotland's natural beauty, its history, its heritage, its leisure facilities and our internationally renowned reputation as a friendly host all play their part. And we should look at business tourism...
Sorry, Mr Campbell, could you turn your microphone? Thank you very much.
We should look at business tourism in that context. And we should try, wherever we possibly can, to link these assets with the needs of business. We should continue to encourage visitors to plan extra time in order to experience Scotland outside of the conference hall. Despite the economic climate, as Mike Mackenzie mentioned, tourism has continued to grow, last year by 9%. And although tourism faces many challenges, business tourism contributes, as has been said, $878 million to the economy. I certainly believe that improving business tourism as a proportion of the total tourism take to 25% is very achievable. Tourism supports approximately 270,000 jobs, with a high proportion of rural areas based on tourism. My own constituency of North East Fife is one such rural area. And like Dennis Robertson, I would like to say a little bit about North East Fife as opposed to North East Scotland. The northeast part of Fife has an outstanding amount to offer visitors, ranging from beautiful coastal villages off the East Neuk to the numerous golf courses and to what some folks say is the jewel in the crown, St Andrews itself. A destination for leisure visitors it certainly is, but a great deal is also being done to promote North East Fife and St Andrews in particular as a business tourism destination. St Andrews, of course, features in the Ambassadors programme, designed fundamentally to spread the word. The University of St Andrews is a key partner of the Central Ambassador programme, covering the key areas of agriculture, sport, medicine and science. And of course, in relation to the conference bid fund, it's not only Glasgow which has been successful. St Andrews has also been successful in attracting a conference for October 2013, where I2ES, who operate in the field of new and emerging tabletop and interactive surface technologies, are co-hosting an event with UIST, the User Interface Software and Technology Group, an event which it is hoped will attract 435 delegates spending just under £1 million between October the 6th and 9th next year. If St Andrews can do it, hopefully other places can too, and we should do our best to promote this fund. The Fife Tourism Partnership is another organisation which acts as a forum for events and the sharing of resources, principally through a directory, which could be helpful for business in promoting facilities. And in addition to this, the St Andrews Partnership has held 2-day workshops promoting business tourism in the area on the 23rd and 30th of October this year. And of course, we should bear in mind Visit Scotland's Central Scotland Business Tourism Unit, which is there to provide impartial advice on venues and local services to those planning a conference or another event. Presiding Officer, there is no shortage of premium meeting and conference facilities in and around St Andrews. It is, after all, the home of golf, and the hotels around the town, the Old Course Hotel and the Fairmont, to name but two, have substantial conference facilities and a wide range of products to suit a business clientele. However, it's fair to say that a great deal of Fife's business tourism facilities are located in St Andrews, and opportunities elsewhere in the Kingdom of Fife are relatively limited. Indeed, the concentration of business tourism facilities in major centres of population is a pattern repeated in all parts of Scotland. Clearly, for the organisers of a conference or an exhibition, it is more practical in a logistical sense to gravitate towards centres of population where transport links and services are more convenient. But that's not a problem unique to Scotland. That's why it's so important that all the stakeholders involved in the tourism sector take the necessary steps to ensure that the benefits of business tourism are shared as widely as possible. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, tourism supports a relatively high proportion of the total jobs in rural areas. However, when efforts are made to draw tourists to a particular town or city, be it St Andrews or Dundee, there needs to be an effective strategy in place to draw business visitors out of those places, from the conferences, into the wider area, and to invest their time and enjoyment in the region as a whole. Visit Scotland has a role to play in that strategy. It operates a frequent outreach service whereby knowledgeable staff from visitor information centres, where they normally interact with leisure tourists, attend conferences and events around the country to try and link business tourists with the wider leisure facilities available that they might otherwise not have considered. It's also in the interest of the tourism industry as a whole if we can showcase the diversity of Scotland and encourage visitors to come back again and again, with conference delegates perhaps bringing their families along for a second visit, for example, as suggested by Fergus Ewing. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, we already know that Scotland is doing well in terms of business tourism. As a whole, we're an attractive place to do business and to hold conferences. We have a proven track record of success, and testament to that is the fact that nearly a third of international association conferences held in the UK are hosted in Scotland. In terms of strengthening the link between business visitors and leisure, accordingly, we have a perfect opportunity next year to attract visitors to more rural areas as the Year of Natural Scotland in 2013 unfolds. And as others have suggested in this debate, we can be optimistic. We can build on our success to date. Finally, however, I would be grateful if the Minister could just take on board in his closing remarks the comments made in the recent the Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee report in relation to the possible disadvantages for rural areas. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. I now call Mark Griffin, to be followed by John Mason.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to speak in the debate this afternoon in business tourism. Tourism in general has been targeted as a growth industry in Scotland, particularly in the run-up to the 2014 Commonwealth Games, Ryder Cup and beyond. And within that sector, business tourism has a massive part to play and is already contributing over £800 million per year to the Scottish economy. Figures also show that business tourist visitors contribute 50 to 100% more to the local economy in spending than leisure tourists, as been mentioned by other speakers, and they are likely to visit again on holiday if they have a positive experience. That highlights just how important it is that the government and local authorities work to attract business tourism here, to bring money into the economy immediately, and also work to increase the possibility of return visits by making their stay as welcoming and as comfortable as possible. Glasgow has been tremendously successful in attracting business tourism and has secured its position as the largest destination for business tourism in the UK outside of London. That didn't happen by chance, though. That's because the administration at Glasgow City Council has recognised the importance of business tourism to the city economy, where the council leader, Gordon Matheson, chairs the Glasgow City Marketing Bureau, underlining the significance of the Bureau and its activities. It's easy to see why the administration at Glasgow City Council placed such a high emphasis on business tourism. When you look into the figures, you see that conference delegates account for one hotel bed out of every 5 sold in Glasgow. Yep, certainly.
John Mason.
I thank the member for giving way, and I take his points and the good things that Glasgow has done. Would you accept that one of the successes of the SCCC is that, despite it's publicly owned, it is kept at a distance from Glasgow City Council and there has not been political interference?
Mark Griffin.
It's still run by members from Glasgow City Council, so there is still involvement from the council, and the Marketing Bureau is advertising Glasgow in all its venues, so naturally there's always going to be involvement, particularly with such a high-profile council leader at the forefront of any of that activity. but Glasgow has been successful in bidding from funding as well from the National Conference Fund unveiled by the Government this year. The £2 million fund was set up with the aim of making Scotland more competitive within the international conference market and was open to bids to attract conferences which fall into the Government's 12 target sectors. Glasgow have been able to secure 7 major domestic and international conferences, which will bring in almost 17,000 visitors to the city from around the world. They'll fill about 80,000 hotel room nights and contribute a massive £27 million to the city economy. These conferences have been won in an extremely competitive international market, and Glasgow have had to beat off competition from conference venues across the world, including Paris, San Francisco and Tokyo, so certainly illustrious company there. That initial investment of £2 million in the conference bid fund has already been proven to be extremely valuable. The Minister himself has illustrated with his coin trick today just how valuable that's been, and I'm sure other authorities will be able to benefit from that funding and expertise on offer, as have been mentioned, some already have. Aberdeen themselves have been mentioned as another authority making strides in attracting business tourism. As mentioned in the amendment today, this year they've committed to paying off the £26.2 million of accumulated debt of the Aberdeen Exhibition and Conference Centre, showing their commitment to business tourism in an effort to grow international conference business coming to Aberdeen. As outlined at the beginning of my contribution today, it is important that government and local authorities work to increase business tourism as it produces that immediate boost to the local economy. But it's possibly more important, though, that the experience of the visiting delegate is a positive one, so that the global organisations, trade groups and businesses feel confident in being able to return to Scotland for future conferences or to do business, and that individual delegates themselves would choose to come back on holiday.
1 minute left.
That means that when we do have a captive audience at a conference or convention of people who wouldn't ordinarily visit Scotland, all possible promotional opportunities are realised. That ranges from the friendly welcome at the hotel or venue, promotional material at the conference, having good Scottish cuisine on offer, and easy access to recreational activities outside of the conference. And I would hope that every visitor to a conference in Glasgow this month is made fully aware of the excellent shopping facilities in the city centre as we approach Christmas quickly. The Government also needs to make sure that journeys are convenient, comfortable and as seamlessly connected as possible. Our airports need to be directly connected to our cities, and since the cancellation of the Glasgow Airport rail link, the Government has yet to come up with effective alternative solutions for linking Glasgow Airport to the city centre. I don't want to finish on a negative. I'll finish by praising the Government for its commitment to the business tourism sector and the £2 million bid fund, but just say that I think there is more to do in terms of improving transport in Scotland and making sure that the delegates keep coming back to Scotland again and again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I now call John Mason.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think we've heard a lot of good news today at a national level. Figures like 23% of all international association conferences in the UK are hosted in Scotland. And clearly, we have some great venues with great scenery, food and drink, history, golf, and all of these things that attract people. However, you perhaps will not be surprised if I concentrate my remarks on Glasgow. Glasgow attracts some 2.3 million visitors per year who contribute some £595 million to the local economy. The age profile of people coming to Glasgow is younger than the national average. 45% are under 35, compared to the national average of 32%. And some 30,000 people are employed in tourism-related activities in Glasgow. We have over 6,500 hotel rooms within 5 miles of the SECC, 9,000 within 10 miles, and 18,000 in metropolitan Glasgow, if you include guest houses, bed and breakfast, and university accommodation. The SECC has been mentioned, and I should perhaps declare that I was a non-executive director of that organisation for around a year when I was a councillor in 07-08. It is majority owned by Glasgow City Council and has given a huge boost to the city with conferences and many other events. But I think it does show that that is a success within the public sector, owned by the public sector, but without interference, and the majority of the directors are non-councillors. I think, too, if we're mentioning individual people, I think a lot of the success and the growth of the SECC was under Charlie Gordon and Stephen Purcell, as well as under the present leadership. And they have been voted again Best UK Conference Centre for 2012. Now, those visiting the site recently will have seen the hydro recently being built, which will have a capacity of some 12,000. Its actual title, the Scottish Hydro Arena, is due to open in September 2013, and that will be suitable for music, sports, conferences, and was needed because the SECC at the moment does not have halls that are big enough, does not have permanent seating. And the hydro could host 140 events each year, which has the potential to inject 131 million into Glasgow's economy. And it is expected to be one of the top 5 busiest indoor arenas in the world, along with Madison Square Garden and the O2 in London. And I understand from the SECC that one of the aims that they have when the new venue is opened is to establish more of a trade exhibition portfolio, which could also initiate real growth in the local economy through international buyers coming to Glasgow. The Glasgow City Marketing Bureau has also been mentioned already today, and that is a body which brings together venues, hotels, support services and creative industries to present a really joined-up approach to conference organisers from around the world. And I have to say that some of the figures are really impressive. Since being set up in 2005, they have brought £958 million worth to the city economy. 3 million conference delegate hotel room nights, 1 in 5 hotel beds sold in Glasgow are for conference delegates. And for the 6th year in a row, it was voted the UK's best convention bureau in 2012. Looking forward to 2017, there are 278 conventions confirmed with a value of £120 million, which equates to 410,000 hotel delegate room nights. Glasgow also has benefited, as has been said, from the Visit Scotland £2 million National Conference bid fund. And if I did my figures correctly, the Minister said that it was 527,000 had been put in and we got 56 million put out, which is about £106 for every pound invested. So that is even better, I think, than was suggested. But there is benefit to the...
Ferguson.
I mean, I should have realised that John Mason is a mathematician, so he's picked up what others failed to spot. But the 53-to-1 return, Presiding Officer, takes account of the match funding made by other partners, including Glasgow City Council.
John Mason.
I thank the Minister very much for that clarification. And I think on the point of clarification too, although a lot of these conferences and conventions are coming to the cities, I think there is a huge spin-off. And either people can, through an extended break, visit other parts of Scotland, or we can encourage them to do so in the future. So I think that's one we need to continue to work on. But Mark Griffin already mentioned that I think the initial 7 conventions which were won for Glasgow through the National Bid Fund, I believe that's now up to 15, and with some 30,000 due to come, including the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Healthcare in 2013 and the World Biomaterials Congress in 2020. Just to give an example of a conference that has been in Glasgow and has been very successful, in March, it was the Diabetes UK Conference. They had some 2,800 scientists and healthcare professionals. There were only 4 places in Britain which are big enough to hold them, the others being London, Manchester and Liverpool. And one of the strengths of that conference was the relationship between the SECC, Glasgow City Marketing Board, Kelvin Grove Art Gallery, where they held a dinner with Glasgow Life involved in that, and also the Lord Provost's involvement from the Council. Also NHS linked in with GPs encouraged to attend the conference, and publicity and roadshows around the city which raised the profile of diabetes and encouraged referrals to GPs. We need to play to our strengths. Clearly, weather is not always attractive for us, but can be attractive for other people. I think the fact we speak English is very positive too. One of the reasons I like to go to Ireland is because I'm leaving the UK, but I can still speak English. And that can be a real positive for us. I think Scotland loses out by being in the Union, and our higher profile internationally, once we are independent, would help us attract many more of these conferences. Thank you.
We now move to the winding up speeches. I believe that there are a number of members who took part in the debate who are not here for the winding up speeches. They are Mike McKenzie, Duncan McNeill, Tavish Scott, and Christine Graham. I find this behaviour unacceptable, and I am confident that the whips will do something about it and do something about it quickly. I now call on Murdo Fraser. Mr Fraser, you've got 6 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This has been a very welcome debate, largely consensual, and all members have recognised the value of business tourism. As the government motion says, its contribution is £2.9 billion to the Scottish economy, and that's absolutely vital, particularly in these difficult times. And indeed, while by no means is business tourism recession-proof, there are aspects, particularly of conference organisation, dealing with organisations from the public sector and from various associations, which have perhaps ridden that out better than some other areas of commercial activity. As we've heard in the debate, the main market for Scottish business tourism is the rest of the UK. I think there is a key issue that we need to address, and I raised this in the briefing that we had at lunchtime before the debate, and that is encouraging those who are coming to take part, perhaps in a conference, to extend their stay, to participate in other activities or visit other parts of the country. But of course, we only do that if we get to them before they actually make their booking and commit their flights. And there is a question of coordination there, which I know the Minister and his officials are working on. I welcome the conference bid fund that the Minister referred to and the success that is having in attracting visitors from elsewhere. On the subject of finance, I was interested to see a number of SNP members making the call for a reduction in VAT for the sector. And of course, that is a call made by many in the tourist and hospitality industry themselves. I'm not at all surprised by that. It is a certainty of life that if you ask somebody in business, would they rather pay lower taxes, the answer is invariably yes, of course they would. So I'm not surprised people make that call. What I do think is curious is that SNP members would rather focus their attentions on a tax, the control of which is elsewhere, rather than a business tax which this government controls, which is business rates. And perhaps if I'll just make this point and I'll give way to Mr Robertson. And perhaps if members from the tourist sector had been asked if they would welcome a cut in business rates, I'm sure they would have endorsed that call enthusiastically. And I'm surprised that SNP members did not make that call, but I'm now giving Mr Robertson the opportunity to do so.
I thank the member for giving way. It's not the SNP as such that's calling for this, it's the British Hospitality Association, and they have been for years looking at a VAT reduction. And what they say, for every pound that would come off the VAT, they would actually get several back. And I can't remember the figures, Mr Fraser, but the industry does say there would be greater investment if VAT was reduced.
And I'm sure that would apply equally to business rates, but of course SNP members would rather concentrate their fire on a government and a parliament in which they have little influence, as opposed to one over which they have, I would suspect, a great deal of influence. But that is my only discordant note, Presiding Officer, in this debate. I want now to, so as not to disappoint Christine Graham, make some references to my local area, and in particular Perth and Kinross, where we have some great assets. Gleneagles Hotel is a conference venue, where of course the G7 was held, and with Stephen Leckie in the gallery, I could not fail to mention Crieff Hydro, and I'd be surprised if there was a single member in the chamber who had not at some point been to a conference at that wonderful establishment. And elsewhere, of course, we have Pitlochry Festival Theatre, an excellent conference venue, well served by local hotels. In the city of Perth itself, Scotland's newest city, we have the marvellous facility that is the concert hall, opened in 2005. In the last year, 2010-11, there were 19,000 conference delegates attending across 54 days events at the concert hall. The Conservative conference has been there, the SNP conference has been there, the STUC conference has been there, the EIS conference, and many others. And in the last year for which we have figures, the economic benefit in 2008 showed that that was worth £1.3 million annually at that stage, and I'm sure it is much higher today, and the feedback from those attending is extremely positive. There are challenges for the city, however. The first is that while we have some very good quality hotels in Perth, there is a need for a high quality, perhaps 4-star large hotel close to the city centre to serve the conference market, and I know that Perth and Kinross officials are working on trying to attract an operator there. And secondly, good conference destinations need an underpinning academic and research community. In Perth, we've got Perth College, part of the University of the Highlands and Islands, with the excellent Centre for Mountain Studies, which helped attract the Global Change and World's Mountains Conference in 2010. Let's see that expanded if we can, so we can attract yet more. But there are also challenges. There's a challenge of connectivity. We need better transport links. I'm always banging on about the rail link between Perth and Edinburgh and how that can be improved. And Stephen Leckie would not forgive me if I did not mention broadband, because people who are attending conferences in the Crieff Hydro expect to have high-quality, fast access to broadband, and it isn't good enough at the moment. And that also means access to 3G and 4G as it's being rolled out, so we don't leave rural areas behind. And finally, just briefly, Presiding Officer, we need high-quality skills in hospitality. This is an issue that members of the Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee have touched on a great many times over the last year. Perhaps business tourism throughout the year can help tackle the seasonality issue, which is key to driving up standards within hospitality and upskilling the workforce. Presiding Officer, this has been a very positive debate. I commend the work being done by the Government. I equally commend the work being done by the private sector in attracting business tourism. I'm happy to support the Government's motion and the Labour amendment. Thank you.
I now call on Rhoda Grant. Ms Grant, you've got 8 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. When I saw this debate coming up, I thought it might be quite a boring afternoon, a good cause, but maybe not an awful lot to say, and I'm delighted that I was not right in that. Yes, Christine's right, a lot of people used it to highlight what was best in their own constituencies, but in doing so I think they highlighted what was best of Scotland, and I think that augurs well for us all in a positive debate that actually tells the world what we're good at. I think the debate was also excellent for highlighting the importance to the Scottish economy of business tourism, and I'll not rehash the statistics we've heard throughout the debate. But one of the things it does do is create all year-round tourism, which was always an issue for us. Seasonality of the tourism industry meant that it was low-skilled, low-paid, and there was no career path. And a lot of the members who spoke today talked about the career path, the skills that were required. And having this year-round career will actually help that happen. And I think that can only benefit us all, and indeed the wider tourism industry as well. Many of those who contributed talked about the level of spend by the tourism visitor, and I think it was right to highlight that. But others mentioned, such as Mark Griffin, mentioned the impact of retail and took the opportunity to highlight the good retail experience in Glasgow. But it also has a knock-on benefit to restaurants, hotels. And indeed, Margaret McCulloch also talked about the benefit of to our local businesses, not maybe those directly involved in the conferences, but the networking opportunity that provided for our businesses and enabling them to learn from those who were coming. So basically it's an opportunity for us all to showcase Scotland, hoping that people come back with their families for other trips as well. A lot of those contributing talked about the EET committee report, The Winning Years, and the challenges about getting more people out into our more rural areas. In the report, the committee noted that urban areas are doing well, but not so much in rural areas. And some speakers today mentioned the Glasgow Commonwealth Games and how that would concentrate on Glasgow and maybe not further out. And I would say when the committee was taking evidence, I think we were reassured to hear that the organising committee were also looking at ways of extending people's stay at the Commonwealth Games and encouraging them out to other areas. So I think it's important to put that on record and hope that they will be successful in that. We need things like through ticketing to the rest of Scotland, better transport and connectivity to make that happen, because I think what was quite an eye-opener to me was Colin Beattie's observations about being a business tourist himself, and he was talking about, the convenience of facilities, the tat and gift shops that you would get close by to the venue, and I think we probably need to look at extending the business tourism visit rather than making sure that they only go to places close by. And I think in a meeting earlier today we discussed the professional conference management organisations' roles in that, and the ability for people to go out and speak to them beforehand so that they knew what was on offer in other parts of Scotland, and indeed encourage people to book beyond the event they were actually attending, which would enable them to go out into other parts of Scotland. And Duncan McNeill made a very good bid about Inverclyde in that respect. You know, people coming to Glasgow for tourism, business tourism events could actually be sailing down in Inverclyde very quickly if we had the proper transport and links. And that, I suppose, brings me on to one of the big issues of the debate, which is transport. I think it's very clear that we need better transport links. A lot of people talked about air passenger duty and kind of the double whammy that had for passengers within Scotland using a hub and connecting flights. Tavish Scott was talking about the air discount scheme, and I'm sure Tavish would also agree with me that quite often the people from the islands get a triple whammy with the air passenger duty, because they not only come from the island to a centre, they then get a connecting flight to the hub and then have to pay it again at the hub. So sometimes they're paying the duty 3 times. So I think we need to look at ways of dealing with this problem. I would also agree with him about the air discount scheme. We need to reinstate that for businesses. I think it will make a big difference about creating a level playing field for businesses in our islands, and I think that would help grow their economies. Many contributors talked about rail links between our airports and cities, Glasgow and indeed Edinburgh as well, and probably further afield. I think it's important that the Minister maybe takes that back as an issue, that we need to improve those transport links so that we can get people from the airports to other transport hubs and out indeed to the rest of Scotland. And I think it was Roderick Campbell kind of talked about the logistics and transport and how it pulled people into urban areas rather than pushing them out into our more rural areas. And people talked about the air route development scheme run so well by Glasgow and maybe trying to replicate that in other places. And maybe we just need to look at direct flights for conferences. If people are setting up conferences in our cities, we maybe need to look at better transport links. And I think if we work with our airports, we could do that. Fergus Ewing at the start of the debate talked about the bid fund, and quite unashamedly said that he was hoping this debate was a chance to highlight this bid fund, which maybe wasn't well recognised throughout Scotland. It's very clear that that's not just for the large urban areas, but I suppose it's only natural that those cities that are involved in business tourism are aware of the bid fund and are making the most of it. I think all of us who took the opportunity today to talk about the facilities and ability of our own areas to attract business tourism also need to take back to those areas the bid fund and the opportunities there for them to pull in help for business tourism. An area close to my heart was touched on by Mary Scanlon and Murdo Fraser, and that was of broadband and mobile connectivity. Really, if we're trying to attract business tourism, we need to have proper broadband and mobile facilities. If we don't do that, people won't come, they won't be able to continue with their work. There are a lot of issues I wanted to touch on, Presiding Officer, and I'm kind of conscious of time, especially that of our cities, which was reflected in our motion. A lot of the Glasgow MSPs took the opportunity to highlight what Glasgow has done and what the City Council's contribution was there. The same with Aberdeen, and indeed people have mentioned Perth, Dundee. Can I just mention places like Inverness in my own region? Eden Court is a favourite for party conferences, as is indeed Oban in my region as well. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, at the beginning of this debate, Ken McIntosh talked about the challenges to our economy, and I think he was right to point out those issues. However, we do have a growing sector, and we need to make the most of it. We're known for things like heather and bagpipes, but I'm not sure that's such a bad thing. We have brave, but we need to build on that stereotype and say that there is more about Scotland than just heather and bagpipes. We need to point out that we are a good destination for business tourism, and that's all our business. We are all ambassadors, and we need to make sure we go out there and sell Scotland for that purpose.
I now call on Fergus Ewing to wind up the debate. Minister, you have 10 minutes.
Presiding Officer, thank you very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed this debate. It's been an excellent and useful debate, and I think it will help to promote a better understanding of both business tourism and the bid fund around the country. So I'm extremely grateful to every member that's taken part. I'd like just to try and address some of the specific points that have been raised to do justice to members, but as is my wont, I undertake to write to members if they've made specific calls for information, and if I fail to do so, please chip me, raise a few points of order, whatever you wish to do, so that I don't neglect your utterances and demands. Ken McIntosh rightly suggested that we need to instil the idea that young people can have an excellent career in tourism, and Margaret McCulloch pointed out it should be regarded as in France as a profession. I think I would endorse both of those sentiments. An excellent example is the good work that the East Lothian Hospitality Academy, which had its reception in this Parliament, and whose achievements I've since had the chance of learning more about at an event attended by many of the college representatives, whose work we appreciate here. I think these are helping to achieve the aims they've described. Mary Scanlon quite rightly pointed out the success achieved in Inverness, and I'm able to say that the flagship buyer event, which took place a couple of weeks ago and which I attended, called Scotland Means Business, where buyers come along and do a speed dating session with many of our visitor attractions. That will be held in Inverness next year, so I hope Mary and I can have a little private date there and go along. So I shouldn't neglect, by mere flattery or whatever, to ignore Mary Scanlon's ever-persistent pursuit of the apparent defects of our website in relation to identifying the Highlands and the islands in relation to walking. I'm determined to get to the very bottom of this, so I will. Believe me, I'm going to sort this one out, okay, particularly since I'm off to Orkney tomorrow. I was very pleased to hear Margaret McCulloch's praise of Visit Lanarkshire. I met Stephen Balfour at the recent Scotland Means Business event. I think that she's right. That is a fine example of partnership. And Duncan McNeill highlighted the good example of the use of the quayside at Greenock in the Clyde and the extraordinary success that his constituents, partners, local authority and others have achieved with the cruise industry, 60,000 people. I've recently sent a letter of support to Richard Alexander, Chair of Cruise Scotland, to see what we can do to help them secure further business in the North American market. This truly is a Scottish success story all around Scotland, from Orkney to Greenock to Leith. We see our ports and harbours being used for the cruise industry in ways that we would never have anticipated even a decade ago, and it's great that they're also being used for other purposes such as renewables as well. Tavish Scott also raised with me the air discount scheme, and he has campaigned valiantly on this with Liam MacArthur, I believe, and I'm not absolutely sure of the details here, so I hope he'll bear with me. I do undertake that I will look into this because he is raising it in a very straightforward way. It's absolutely appropriate. My understanding from a note I've had is that it wasn't the intention of this scheme to extend to business-related travel. It was a scheme for individuals, but if I'm wrong about that, then I would put that right, and in any event, I will look into that point and write to Mr Scott about that. Christine Graham made a very interesting speech, as always. No one can accuse Christine Graham of being anyone's patsy, a woman of independent mind. She most certainly is. And I have, as she said, visited her part of Scotland, the borders, on a few occasions recently, and I recognise that they have a number of difficulties there. We're on that case. Visit Scotland is aware of that case. Recently I had the pleasure of visiting Trequeer House, and at, I think, 9:30 a.m. in the morning, I had the pleasure of sampling some of their newly brewed Jacobite ale, thereby, no doubt, transgressing some Scottish Government health advice policies in the buying going, but it was very good indeed, I have to say. And I know that in St Queer Crowse they also have the Shakespeare Festival. And we do hear quite a lot from Christine Graham about the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune aimed towards her constituency and her constituents, which is, so it's absolutely right that she raises these points. Murdo Fraser made a number of good points about the importance of conference market and business tourism to places first of the Central Belt, and in particular the fine city of Perth, and he mentioned the success of the city halls there, and we recently, as he pointed out, had a very pleasant, enjoyable and successful, I think from most people's perspectives, conference in Perth, in the concert hall. And I also recall that he mentioned the Pitlochry Festival Theatre, and I had the pleasure of attending an event there on Sunday, when I had the pleasure of meeting Scotland's finest B&Bs and listened to their concerns about matters which we take very seriously indeed, because I think there is a sense in Scotland that the difficulties in the tourism sector are faced perhaps more in rural and island areas than in the cities, and that's something that we're very much aware of and we're very keen to address with all members. Presiding Officer, I think there were perhaps three recurrent issues which pervaded this debate, and I just wanted to touch on them before concluding. Firstly, a kind of city-rural divide in relation to business tourism, which we're debating today. And of course, I think we've all agreed that there is more potential for growing business tourism all over Scotland, both urban and rural. I can advise members that although I cannot reveal these matters now because they're subject to commercial confidentiality, there are a number of bids in rural areas to the bid fund, and I would be surprised were they not, or some of them not, successful. But I think much more can be done by us all to promote to our local authorities the success of this fund. I'm certainly keen to do that. When I meet councillors from around Scotland, I often have no idea which party they're from or from any party, and frankly, I'm not especially interested, because what we want to do is to make things happen in Scotland, to promote the economy, to see every part of Scotland benefiting from business tourism. And I've had...
Christine Graham.
Oh, Christine, yes.
Just for a point of information, it's £2 million over 3 years. How is that going to be allocated? I mean, it's all going to go, if it all went in 1 year, what I'm saying is if people are applying, are you going to stagger it over those 3 years?
Well, the fund is available for 3 years. The fund will be committed to various conferences which are won between now and, frankly, the end of the decade, and in one case, I think, beyond. The money will not actually have to be paid, of course, until much nearer the time of the conference. The money would be paid over near or at the time of the conference. But we shall have to see how it performs. I mean, currently we are around about £500,000 or £600,000 committed after a relatively short period. We will keep this closely under review. But thus far, the success of the fund at a notional return to the public sector of, as I pointed out a gently, or perhaps not gently actually, earlier, is 53 to 1. And as many members have been kind enough to point out during this debate, and not just from the Scottish National Party benches, this is a terrific success for Scotland, and I am very grateful to all the members who recognise that this is the case, and it's something that we should build on, because I think there can be far greater things yet to come, and we are looking very closely at how we can build on that success. The other themes raised concern transport links, and I think I don't have time, Presiding Officer, to go into all of these. Suffice it to say that I think almost all of the points raised were of a very serious nature, and ones which we are either pursuing or will in due course pursue. The M74 extension has transformed connectivity in Glasgow. The Aberdeen Peripheral Road will now go ahead and thereby solve a long-seated and very serious problem in Aberdeen indeed. The third theme was in relation to the costs of VAT, APD and fuel duty, and I think many members highlighted that these are extremely challenging times for governments and for businesses, and they were right to highlight these issues. Presiding Officer, have I much time left? Sorry?
Sorry, you've got about a minute.
A minute. Thank you, Presiding Officer. Well, just bringing my remarks to a conclusion, I would like to thank all members who took part for a very consensual debate. But as Murdo Fraser, I think, pointed out, the real thanks the real praise should go to all of those who are running conference facilities, who are organising conferences, who are bringing business tourism to this country, who are participating in the success of this venture, who are working more successfully than I think in any time in Scotland's history in partnership together. And I have to say that I think Glasgow is ahead of the rest of the country in that regard, and it is that close working, that partnership working, that is delivering enormous success in business tourism for Scotland, and it's also, perhaps even more important than a monetary return, creating a hugely positive image of Scotland worldwide to all those visitors who come to Scotland, and 40% of them who come here will come back. So the more we can win conferences at home and abroad, the more we can see business tourism take off in cities, in rural Scotland and in our islands, the more successful we will see not simply our tourism business, but our industry, our inward investment and our country as a whole. I'm extremely indebted to the leadership shown by Mike Cantley and Malcolm Roughhead at Visit Scotland and all their staff, and I thank them on behalf of the Scottish Government and I believe the Scottish Parliament for all these efforts, and the best, I think, is yet to come.
That ends the debate on business tourism. The next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 4896. In the name, we have a from Liz Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I wonder if I may seek your advice. On the 25th of October, in response to a question I asked at First Minister's question time, the First Minister said in part of his reply, and I quote, "There are now, I think, 18,000 people employed directly in renewable energy across Scotland." A Scottish Government briefing, which is based on the evidence produced by the renewable sector, says very clearly that there are in fact 11,000 people directly employed in the sector, a difference obviously of 7,000. Yesterday, when this error was pointed out to the First Minister's office, a Scottish Government spokesman said, and I quote, "The First Minister has corrected the Parliament's official report to make it clear that there are 11,000 jobs supported by Scotland in the renewable energy sector." Presiding Officer, may I ask your advice as to whether the official record can be amended in this way without the First Minister acknowledging to Parliament itself that an error has been made and without informing the member concerned?
May I thank the member for her advance notice of the point of order. I was first made aware of this issue earlier this afternoon, and I have since made inquiries. I understand that the original request from the First Minister's office for a correction was made for a correction to the official report was made on the morning of the 15th of November. I can confirm that the correction to the official report was made this afternoon. The process for agreeing corrections to the official report was agreed in a report by the Standards Procedures and Public Appointments Committee in 2010. The report also sets out the criteria used by the official report and the processes to be followed. The member will be well aware that the guidance includes steps that a member should take to publicise a correction when that has been made. I confirm that the correction to the official report was made this afternoon. All of this information is set out in the official report's web page of the Parliament's website. Next item of business is consideration of a business motion. The next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 4896 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out a revision to the business for tomorrow. Order! I would ask... Is that Michael McMahon? What did he say? Mr McMahon, I would ask you to withdraw that remark now. Thank you. I would ask any member... Order! I would ask any member who wishes to speak against the business motion to press the request to speak button now. No member has asked to speak against the motion. Therefore, I will now put the question to the Chamber. The question is that motion number 4896, in the name of... My apologies, Mr Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, and in moving the motion, can I say that the change is to allow for a debate on further education as requested by the Liberal Democrats?
I thank you. The question is that motion number 4896, in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is agreed. The next item of business is consideration of the business motion setting out a business programme. I'd ask any member who wishes to speak against the motion to press the request to speak button now, and I call on Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion number 4895.
Formally moved.
No member is asked to speak against the motion. Therefore, I will now put the question to the Chamber. The question is that motion number 4895, in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed to. The next item of business is consideration of business motion 4898, in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick, on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out a timetable for Stage 2 of the Freedom of Information Amendment Scotland Bill. I'd ask any member who wishes to speak against the motion. There's far too much noise. I would ask any member who wishes to speak against the motion to press the request to speak button now, and I call on Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion number 4898.
Formally moved.
No member is asked to speak against the motion. Therefore, I will now put the question to the Chamber. The question is that motion number 4898, in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed to. The next item of business is consideration of 3 Parliamentary Bureau motions. I would ask Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion number 4903 to 4905 in approval of SSIs en bloc.
Formally moved.
The question on these motions will be put at decision time. There are 3 questions to be put as a result of today's business. The first question is that amendment number 4886.2 in the name of Ken Macintosh, which seeks to amend motion number 4886 in the name of Fergus Ewing on business tourism, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The amendment is therefore agreed to. The next question is that motion number 4886 in the name of Fergus Ewing, as amended on business tourism, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed to. I would propose to ask a single question on motion number 4903 to 4905 on approval of SSIs. If any member objects to a single question being put, please say so now. The next question is that motion number 4903 to 4905, in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick, on approval of SSIs, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motions are therefore agreed to. Before I close, before we move on to members' debate, can I say that I would appreciate if Mr McMahon would come and see me in my office immediately after decision time. I now allow a short pause to allow members who are not participating in the members' debate to leave for the public gallery to clear before we move on to members' debate.